This poem is called Dayenu, and it comes from a Hebrew expression that means, if only for this it would have been sufficient, my life. If only for the beauty of the rising sun. If only for the moment my granddaughter called to tell me she'd won a chess tournament. If only for the photo on my wall of Ken Pinkney and Danny Levine and me cooking hot dogs on an open fire in the middle of Nebraska on tour with the symphony because we didn't want to go into one of the very crowded restaurants because of our buses, 3 of them, dumping 100 strangers suddenly into a small town. If only for the moment that Diane, with her spectacularly developed 7th grade breasts, looped her little finger around mine as we stood outside in the night air at intermission of a concert at the Friday Musicale in Jacksonville, Florida. If only for the morning when I porched 94 newspapers from my bicycle. If only for looking out the window in the morning and saying, this is my house, my yard, my grass, my trees standing tall in the early light. If only for the sound of Lenny's voice at the Culture Squad as he reads in stentorian oration, capping thunderly a sudden moment that rises above all others like the Loch Ness Monster, taking a quick peek and disappearing. If only for the moment I read my first Rumi poem and discovered the edge of our limited reality and the ocean of beauty that lay beyond. If only for Stephen Mitchell's translation of the Tao Te Ching, where he speaks of wei wu wei, doing, not doing. If only for T.S. Eliot telling me that there at the still point, there the dance is. If only for E.E. Cummings telling me that he liked to think of dead, or how anyone lived in a pretty how town. If only for my dog Poco snurfling in my armpit, licking my chin, and then chewing on my nose. If only for the moment I looked over at Clyde, my son's golden retriever, sleeping on the couch, and Katie, who was only 5 at the time, looked up at me and said very earnestly, he probably thinks it's 7 o'clock. If only for the power of the silver meteor, coming sliding into the train station in the early morning, watching it stop and steam, and my grandmother Skipper getting off, smiling and hugging, ready with a ball of string to teach us to make lanyards and fishing nets. If only for the sound of my tuba, powerful golden notes flowing into the sound of the orchestra, lifting it, pushing it up from the bottom. If only for the ocean, waves cresting, rolling, breaking, splashing, carrying me smoothly for 5 seconds before dumping me face down, knees scraping into the foam and sand of the disappearing water. If only for the woods that grew so tall, blackberries and oak trees, swamp and pine, palmettos and rattlesnakes, and needles and sand. If only for the amazing night sky, stars blazing like jewels, and everything so quiet, so infinite, so incomprehensible that I could hear my breath go deep into my lungs. If only for the time I guessed heads or tails correctly 14 times in a row, or was it 23? And Eddie kept going double or nothing and ended up owing me like $1,000 that he never paid me because, heck, we were only 10. If only for the moment my daughter sang the Queen of the Night aria, and I was conducting, and her voice was a rich, lilting coloratura, and I was close to tears, choking up, except I had to keep waving my arms to keep the whole thing going. If only for the incredible rich taste of the huge red ripe tomatoes I picked from my 9-foot-tall tomato plants growing beside my house, and they made the most delicious sandwiches with salt and pepper and Hellmann's mayonnaise. If only for the compost pile of my yard leaves that turned into deep, dark mulch, soft and rich like river soil. If only for the pickup truck I got when I traded my Honda Accord for it, and now I have a manly truck and can go get manly shit like rocks and lumber and haul couches. If only for the hungry look on my son's face when he said, "Well, Dad, are you proud you're going to be a grandfather?" And I knew I couldn't give him a smart aleck answer like, "You're going to make me an old man, aren't you?" The only answer was just simply, "Yes, I'm very proud, John." If only for the night my high school band was in New York City to play for the New York Giants halftime show, back when they actually televised the whole halftime, and we all went to see Music Man at Rockefeller Center, and we saw the Rockettes doing that line kick. And Miss Klein, my English teacher, who was chaperoning us, made me escort her and held onto my arm the whole evening because she didn't want Mr. Pandak, who was a Clark Gable want-to-look-like, pawing at her. If only for the acid trip when I slowly rose up higher and higher above the whole world and looked down and felt the pain of humanity, and a slow tear rolled down my cheek, and I was Christ absorbing all suffering, and Don and Jim saw that I was Christ and prayed before me and asked cosmic questions in stunned reverence, and then we laughed our asses off. If only for the morning I stood in the neighbor's garden looking at her flowers. They were so beautiful, and I saw her in her kitchen watching me, and I was afraid she might be a witch. But she came out and smiled and told me to enjoy the flowers. If only for the feeling of my son's cheek against mine when he was a couple of days old. If only for the moment my daughter, when she was 6, gave me a passionate kiss, just like Mommy, and I smiled at her, and after she left, I wiped the peanut butter off my lips. If only for the monkey tree we climbed for years and years in the woods behind our house, its branches spread wide for swinging and playing Tarzan. If only for my father's telescope that we could look at the moon and look at the stars, the eternal mystery, the unexplainable, the beauty and the stillness, but they kept moving out of the viewfinder. You only got a few seconds because, by God, the earth was actually rotating under the stars, and we could actually see it happening through the telescope. If only for the glow of the red rocks in the sweat lodge, darkness surrounding, and the heat radiating from them, and the mystery of their glow was like being in space, looking at a star forming, or one of those mysterious galactic photos the Hubble takes. If only for the still point, the silence within which nothing is known, but still it changes everything. If only for love, the moment that comes back like the sun, the same moment, but a new day, a new moment, and always your eyes. It would have been sufficient. It would have been enough.